Sergeant Miller was so excited he could hardly sit still on the plane. For over a year, he had been serving far away, missing his home, his friends, and most of all, his dog, Duke. Duke was a big, goofy golden retriever with fur the color of sunshine and a tail that never stopped wagging. Sergeant Miller had rescued Duke from a shelter when he was just a puppy, and they had been best friends ever since. During his deployment, Sergeant Miller thought about Duke every single day. He imagined Duke chasing squirrels in the park, playing fetch with his favorite tennis ball, and snuggling up on the couch for movie night. He even had a picture of Duke taped to his bunk, right next to pictures of his family. He had arranged for a house sitter to care for Duke while he was away. He paid them well and left very clear instructions: plenty of food, fresh water, daily walks, and lots of love. He even left Duke's favorite toys and treats. He trusted that Duke was in good hands. The plane finally landed and Sergeant Miller practically jumped off. He couldn't wait to see Duke's happy face and feel his warm, furry body pressed against him. He pictured Duke running towards him, barking excitedly and licking his face all over. He imagined the happy dance Duke would do, the one where he wiggled his whole body and spun around in circles. Just thinking about it made Sergeant Miller smile. He knew this reunion would be the best part of coming home. He could not wait to hug his best friend. The taxi ride from the airport felt like it took forever. Sergeant Miller kept tapping his foot, his eyes glued to the window. He recognized the familiar streets, the little shops, and the towering oak tree at the corner of his block. Each landmark brought him closer to Duke, and his heart pounded with anticipation. He remembered all the times he and Duke had walked these streets together. Duke loved sniffing every fire hydrant and greeting every person they passed. Kids would always stop to pet him, and Duke would soak up the attention, wagging his tail furiously. Sergeant Miller missed those simple moments more than words could say. He told the taxi driver to slow down as they approached his street. He wanted to savor the moment, to take it all in. He saw Mrs. Henderson's bright pink petunias, Mr. Johnson's perfectly manicured lawn, and the little blue house where the Smiths lived. Everything looked exactly as he remembered it. He paid the driver and stepped out of the taxi, taking a deep breath of the familiar air. It smelled like freshly cut grass and honeysuckle, a scent he had longed for during his time away. He walked up the sidewalk towards his house, his pace quickening with each step. He could almost hear Duke barking, his happy bark that always made Sergeant Miller smile. He reached the gate to his backyard, ready to finally see his best friend. But instead of the happy bark he expected, Sergeant Miller was met with silence. An unsettling silence that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He pushed open the gate and stepped into his backyard, his smile fading. The yard was a mess. Weeds grew tall and unkempt, choking the flower beds. Duke's toys were scattered around, covered in dirt and grime. The once green lawn was now brown and patchy. It didn't look like anyone had cared for the yard in months. "Duke," Sergeant Miller called out, his voice laced with concern. "Duke, where are you, boy?" Still, only silence answered him. He walked further into the yard, his eyes scanning every corner. He checked Duke's doghouse, but it was empty. He looked behind the shed, but there was no sign of his furry friend. A knot formed in Sergeant Miller's stomach. Something was definitely wrong. Duke would never stay quiet when he knew Sergeant Miller was home. He would be jumping and barking and wagging his tail like crazy. The silence was a warning sign, a clear indication that something terrible had happened. He felt a wave of dread wash over him, replacing the excitement he had felt just moments before. He had to find Duke, and he had to find him now. He followed a faint whimpering sound to the far corner of the yard, behind a thick patch of overgrown bushes. And there he found him. Duke was lying on the ground, his once golden fur matted and dull. He was incredibly thin, his ribs showing clearly through his skin. His eyes were sunken and listless. He barely lifted his head when Sergeant Miller approached. "Duke!" Sergeant Miller cried out, rushing to his side. He knelt down and gently stroked Duke's head. "Oh, Duke, what happened to you, boy?" Duke let out a weak whimper and licked Sergeant Miller's hand feebly. His tail gave a small, pathetic thump against the ground. It was clear he was weak and malnourished. Sergeant Miller's heart broke. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. This wasn't the happy, energetic dog he knew and loved. This was a shadow of his former self. Someone had neglected him, starved him, and left him to suffer. Anger and sadness welled up inside Sergeant Miller, threatening to overwhelm him. He scooped Duke up in his arms, careful not to hurt him. Duke was so light, it was shocking. He whispered promises of help and healing into Duke's ear as he carried him towards the house. He knew he had to get Duke to a vet immediately. Sergeant Miller's initial reaction was a mix of fury and utter despair. How could anyone do this to such a sweet, innocent creature? He felt a surge of anger towards the house sitter he had entrusted with Duke's care. He had paid them good money and they had betrayed his trust in the worst possible way. He imagined confronting them, demanding answers, but he knew that wouldn't help Duke right now. Beneath the anger, a wave of guilt washed over him. He had been so far away, so focused on his duty that he hadn't realized what was happening. Had he checked in more often, would he have noticed something was wrong? The thought haunted him. He pushed the guilt aside, knowing he needed to focus on the present. His heart ached seeing Duke in such a fragile state. The sight of his emaciated body, his dull eyes, and his weak tail thumps was almost unbearable. Tears streamed down Sergeant Miller's face as he held Duke close, whispering words of comfort and reassurance. He vowed to do everything in his power to help Duke recover, to bring him back to the happy, healthy dog he once was. He knew it would be a long and difficult road, but he was ready to face it head-on. Duke was his best friend and he wouldn't give up on him. He would get justice for Duke, too. The drive to the vet was a blur. Sergeant Miller sped down the streets, ignoring the speed limit. He kept glancing at Duke in the passenger seat, his heart pounding with worry. Duke lay still, his breathing shallow and raspy. Sergeant Miller stroked his head, whispering words of encouragement. "Hang in there, boy," he said. "We're almost there. You're going to be okay." He pulled into the parking lot of the animal hospital and rushed inside, Duke still cradled in his arms. The receptionist looked up in surprise at the sight of the distraught soldier and the emaciated dog. "Please, you have to help him," Sergeant Miller pleaded, his voice trembling. "He's very sick." The receptionist, seeing the urgency in his eyes, immediately led him to an examination room. A young vet, Dr. Emily Carter, rushed in, her face etched with concern. She gently took Duke from Sergeant Miller's arms and laid him on the examination table. "What happened to him?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. "I don't know," Sergeant Miller said, his voice choked with emotion. "I was deployed overseas. I hired a house sitter to care for him, but when I got home, I found him like this." Dr. Carter began examining Duke, her brow furrowed with concentration. She checked his heart rate, his breathing, and his temperature. She gently palpated his abdomen, wincing slightly. "He's severely dehydrated and malnourished," she said. "We need to run some tests to see the extent of the damage. It's going to be a long night." Hours passed. Sergeant Miller sat in the waiting room, his anxiety growing with each tick of the clock. He paced back and forth, unable to sit still. He replayed the scene of finding Duke over and over in his mind, each time feeling a fresh wave of anger and sadness. Finally, Dr. Carter emerged, her face weary but kind. "Sergeant Miller," she said softly, "we've run the tests." Sergeant Miller held his breath, bracing himself for the news. "How is he?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Dr. Carter sighed. "It's not good. Duke is severely malnourished, and his organs have suffered damage. He's also severely dehydrated. His blood tests show signs of kidney failure. It appears he hasn't had food or water for a very long time." Sergeant Miller felt his heart sink. "Is he going to be okay?" Dr. Carter hesitated. "We're doing everything we can. We've started him on 4 fluids and antibiotics. We're also giving him small amounts of food to try and get his system working again. But he's very weak. Honestly," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "I don't know if he's going to make it. It will be touch and go for the next few days. We will monitor him closely and give him the best care possible." She put a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You brought him in just in time." Despite the grim prognosis, Sergeant Miller refused to give up hope. He knew Duke was a fighter. He spent the rest of the night at the animal hospital, sitting by Duke's side, talking to him and stroking his fur. He told Duke stories about their adventures together, about the time they chased a squirrel up a tree, about their walks in the park, and about all the belly rubs Duke loved. While Duke rested, Sergeant Miller decided he needed to find out what had happened. He stepped outside and called Mrs. Henderson, his next-door neighbor. "Mrs. Henderson, it's Sergeant Miller. I'm back home. I was wondering if you'd seen Duke lately?" Mrs. Henderson's voice was filled with shock and concern. "Oh, Sergeant Miller. Welcome home. I'm so sorry about Duke. I thought you knew. That house sitter you hired, he just left. Vanished. About 2 months ago. We tried to feed Duke, but he was always locked in the backyard. We called and called, but we couldn't reach you, and we didn't know what to do. Sergeant Miller felt a surge of rage. 2 months. 2 months Duke had been alone and neglected. "Did you see the house sitter leave?" he asked, his voice trembling with anger. "Yes," Mrs. Henderson said. "He packed up his car and drove away. We haven't seen him since." Sergeant Miller thanked Mrs. Henderson and hung up the phone, his mind racing. He had to find that house sitter. He had to make him pay for what he had done to Duke. The next few days were a roller coaster of emotions. Sergeant Miller barely left Duke's side. He slept on a cot in the corner of the examination room, waking up every few hours to check on him. He talked to Duke, read to him, and played soft music for him. He wanted Duke to know he wasn't alone and that he was loved. Dr. Carter and her staff worked tirelessly to care for Duke. They administered fluids, medications, and carefully monitored his vital signs. They were cautiously optimistic but warned Sergeant Miller that Duke's condition was still critical. Slowly, ever so slowly, Duke started to show signs of improvement. He started eating small amounts of food, and his eyes seemed a little brighter. He even managed a weak wag of his tail when Sergeant Miller spoke to him. These small victories gave Sergeant Miller hope and renewed his determination to help Duke recover. He knew the road ahead would be long and challenging, but he was ready to face it. He learned how to administer Duke's medications, how to monitor his fluid intake, and how to provide the special care he needed. He became Duke's nurse, his protector, and his best friend. He was determined to nurse Duke back to health, no matter what it took. The bond between them deepened with each passing day. He knew Duke was fighting, and he would fight right alongside him. One morning, Sergeant Miller walked into Duke's room and saw him sitting up. It wasn't much, but it was the first time Duke had been able to sit up on his own since he'd been rescued. He wagged his tail, a real wag this time, not just a pathetic thumb. "Hey, boy," Sergeant Miller said, his voice choked with emotion. "Look at you. You're sitting up." Duke barked softly, a weak but happy sound. Sergeant Miller rushed to his side and knelt down, stroking his head. Duke licked his face, his tail wagging even faster. "That's it, Duke," Sergeant Miller said, tears streaming down his face. "You're getting better. I knew you could do it." That day, Duke ate a little more food, drank a little more water, and even took a few wobbly steps. It was as if he had finally decided he was ready to fight, ready to live. Dr. Carter was thrilled with Duke's progress. "He's a miracle," she said, smiling. "He's not out of the woods yet, but he's definitely on the right track." Sergeant Miller knew they still had a long way to go, but he felt a surge of optimism. Duke was getting better, and that's all that mattered. He continued to care for Duke with unwavering dedication, celebrating every small victory along the way. He knew deep in his heart that Duke would make a full recovery. The spark was back in his eyes, and the wag was back in his tail. Weeks turned into months. Duke's recovery was slow but steady. Sergeant Miller continued to take him to the vet for regular checkups, and Dr. Carter was amazed by his progress. Duke's fur grew back, thicker and shinier than before. He gained weight, his ribs no longer visible. The light returned to his eyes, and his tail wagged with enthusiasm. Sergeant Miller spent hours each day playing with Duke, taking him for walks in the park and giving him plenty of love and attention. He even bought Duke a new tennis ball, his favorite toy. Duke would chase after it with boundless energy, his tail wagging furiously. As Duke regained his strength, Sergeant Miller's determination to find the house sitter intensified. He contacted the police and filed a report. He provided them with all the information he had, including the house sitter's name and a description of his car. He also posted flyers around the neighborhood offering a reward for information leading to his arrest. He couldn't let this go. What that man had done to Duke was unforgivable. He had to be held accountable for his actions. He owed it to Duke, and he owed it to all the other animals who had been neglected and abused. He was determined to bring him to justice, not just for Duke, but for all defenseless creatures. One day, Sergeant Miller received a call from the police. They had found the house sitter. He was living in another state, working under a different name. They had enough evidence to arrest him and were planning to extradite him back to face charges. Sergeant Miller felt a sense of relief wash over him. Finally, justice would be served. He arranged to meet with the police and provided them with a statement. He told them everything that had happened from the moment he left Duke in the house sitter's care to the day he found him starving in the backyard. A few weeks later, Sergeant Miller received another call. The house sitter had been extradited and was being held in the county jail. The trial was set to begin in a few months. Sergeant Miller knew he had to be there. He had to face the man who had betrayed his trust and caused so much suffering to Duke. He wanted to look him in the eye and let him know the pain he had caused. He wanted to make sure he was held accountable for his actions. He wouldn't let Duke down. He would see this through to the end. He felt a sense of grim satisfaction knowing that justice was on its way. Duke deserved nothing less. The day of the trial arrived. Sergeant Miller sat in the courtroom, his heart pounding in his chest. He saw the house sitter brought in, looking pale and nervous. He avoided Sergeant Miller's gaze. During the trial, Sergeant Miller testified about finding Duke in the backyard. He described Duke's condition in detail, his voice breaking with emotion. He showed the jury pictures of Duke before and after the neglect, the contrast shocking. The house sitter's lawyer argued that he had been going through a difficult time and hadn't been able to care for Duke properly. But Sergeant Miller knew that was no excuse. He had been paid to care for Duke and he had failed miserably. Finally, it was Sergeant Miller's turn to speak directly to the house sitter. He stood up, his hands trembling. He looked the house sitter in the eye, his gaze unwavering. "I trusted you," he said, his voice filled with anger and disappointment. "I entrusted you with the care of my best friend, my family. And you betrayed the trust in the worst possible way. You left him to starve. You left him to suffer. You almost killed him." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I don't know why you did what you did," he continued, "but I hope you understand the pain you caused. Duke is lucky to be alive, but he will never be the same. And neither will I." He sat down, his body shaking with emotion. He had said what he needed to say. Now it was up to the jury. The jury deliberated for several hours. Finally, they returned with a verdict. The house sitter was found guilty of animal cruelty and neglect. He was sentenced to a year in jail and ordered to pay a hefty fine. Sergeant Miller felt a sense of closure. Justice had been served. He knew it wouldn't erase the pain and suffering Duke had endured, but it was a step in the right direction. Back at home, Duke was waiting for him, his tail wagging excitedly. He jumped up and licked Sergeant Miller's face, showering him with affection. It was as if he knew that everything was going to be okay. Duke had made a full recovery. He was back to his old self again, full of energy and enthusiasm. He loved playing fetch, going for walks, and snuggling up on the couch with Sergeant Miller. He was happy and healthy, and that's all that mattered. Sergeant Miller looked at Duke, his heart filled with love and gratitude. He had been through so much, but he had persevered. He was a true testament to the power of resilience and the unwavering bond between a soldier and his dog. He knew their bond was stronger than ever before. They had faced adversity together and had come out stronger on the other side. Sergeant Miller and Duke started a new beginning. They appreciated every moment they spent together, cherishing their time more than ever before. Sergeant Miller made sure that Duke always had plenty of food, fresh water, and lots of love. He never took their bond for granted again. They spent their days exploring new parks, playing fetch, and going for long walks. They visited the beach where Duke loved to chase the waves and dig in the sand. They even took a road trip to the mountains where Duke enjoyed hiking and exploring the trails. Sergeant Miller also became an advocate for animal rights. He volunteered at the local animal shelter, helping to care for neglected and abused animals. He spoke out against animal cruelty and neglect, sharing his story and encouraging others to take action. He wanted to make sure that what happened to Duke never happened to another animal again. He knew that one person could make a difference, and he was determined to be that person. He knew that Duke's story could inspire others to be more compassionate and responsible pet owners. He hoped that their story would raise awareness about animal abuse and neglect and encourage people to report it when they saw it. He wanted to be a voice for the voiceless. Sergeant Miller often reflected on the events that had transpired. He realized the true power of loyalty and the unbreakable bond between a soldier and his dog. Duke had been there for him through thick and thin, offering unconditional love and support. He, in turn, had vowed to protect and care for Duke no matter what. He also understood the importance of responsibility. Owning a pet was a privilege, not a right. It came with a commitment to provide for their needs, to ensure their safety, and to give them the love and attention they deserved. He hoped that others would learn from his experience and take their responsibilities as pet owners seriously. He knew that Duke's story was a testament to the resilience of the human-animal bond. It was a reminder that even in the face of adversity, love and loyalty could triumph. He hoped that their story would inspire others to open their hearts and homes to animals in need. And as he looked at Duke, lying contentedly at his feet, his tail thumping softly against the floor, he knew that he had been given a second chance. A chance to make things right, a chance to show Duke how much he loved him, and a chance to make a difference in the lives of other animals. He was grateful for every moment he had with Duke, and he knew that their bond would last forever.